Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the first lecture that's part of the Conservation Symposium that started this morning. According to photographer Kiliii Yuyan's friend Addie, he has said that the most interesting people are the ones who can't really explain what they do. By this standard, Addie claims that this would qualify Kiliii as the most interesting person at any gathering. Wilderness forager, wayward survivalist, traditional kayak builder, model, guide, educator, mentor, and now photojournalist, he has lived many lives. And as anyone who has spent time with him this week can attest, always with that beautiful smile and contagious laugh. His former National Geographic photo editor, Jen Samuel, told me, Kiliii has a relentless positivity, which is absolutely genuine. That positivity has helped Kiliii not only pursue a life that is hard to pin down, it has also helped him in his pursuit of understanding his place in the world. Born to parents who sought refuge in the United States, whisked back to Asia by his grandmother, and then finally finding himself back in the States, Texas of all places, Kilii's journey has been an exploration of self and connectivity, of looking at the human relationship to the natural world from different cultural perspectives. How to reconcile his heritage that included Chinese and American, as well as ties to Nanai and Hezi culture, was the fuel. He says, trying to understand my ancestry led me on a lifelong dive into indigenous perspectives and ultimately guided me into storytelling. In addition to his lovely way of seeing, that smile and positivity, that desire to understand other cultures are the keys to his ability to make such impactful photographs. While Kiliii told me that he rebels against transactional encounters, his friend and assistant, Pat Kane, has a better description of how Kiliii engages with the communities that he photographs. It is a wonderful experience to watch him work. He engages in such a subtle way. He is present, not just barging in photographing. He isn't there to take. He is there to give a sense of their lives. A frequent contributor to National Geographic magazine, as well as the Society's 2023 recipient of the Eliza Skidmore Award for Outstanding Storyteller, Kiliii keeps publications looking for stories that bring in new perspectives. In 2022, he received a grant from the National Geographic Society and the Climate Pledge to photograph a project on the impact of indigenous cultures on conservation. Since then, he has been on the road almost nonstop, visiting communities from coastal Greenland to the coral reefs of Palau to shine a light on this work. His work as a documentary photographer is about facing issues. It is an extension of his own story, a pursuit to make powerful connections, which makes for powerful work. It is about honoring the places he comes from and the people who came before. Please join me in welcoming Kiliii Yuyan to the Xposure stage.
Hello, everyone. I hope you like kayaks, because there will be many of them. My name is Kiliii Yuyan, and as Kathy has mentioned, I'm both Chinese and Nanai Hecheju, which is Siberian native, and I'm also an American. So I would like to think that the annoying side of me is the American side.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Apparently my ears are too floppy to hold the mic in place. Okay, so Guardians of Life is about indigenous conservation. For the longest time, conservationists have looked around the world and said, oh, look at that beautiful piece of land. Wouldn't it be great if that was a park? It's so gorgeous. Let's put 4 fences up around it and throw everybody out, because what are they doing squatting on our beautiful land? But of course, now, people have suddenly realized, oh my goodness, actually, it's not a bug, it's a feature. The people are a feature of that landscape. It's because the people were there that those places looked like wilderness, that they were beautiful to begin with, that the Europeans, when they came to the New World, thought that all of the Americas were untouched lands. There were beautiful lands, but in fact, those lands are some of the most heavily managed landscapes on Earth. And today, as we realize that Indigenous peoples are stewards of the land everywhere in the world, the question now is, how is this possible? How does it make sense? Like, in what ways does this actually work? So when you think about all of these beautiful places, you often think about Serengeti National Park, Yosemite National Park, or you think of the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. And maybe if you're a diver, you think of Palau, like these beautiful mangroves in this Pacific nation. But of course, you don't think of all the people that were evicted from all of these places. In fact, the number of people that have been evicted from conservation strongholds and are now protected areas is the second largest group of refugees on Earth. 30 million people have been evicted by conservation. That's just more than anything except for war, which is unbelievable. But I have a lot of hope. Look at these ladies. These are the guardians of life. So I'm going to start in a place that most civilized peoples will look at and understand right away. Palau is a beautiful place, and it happens to be one of the world's largest marine sanctuaries and is near the Philippines. So if you've never been to Palau or have never seen Palau, then you might not be a diver, because it's very famous among divers, but it is close to the Philippines and it is gigantic. And it's composed of a number of smaller islands and one large island. And it has some of the world's healthiest coral reefs on Earth. Just gigantic swaths of coral that is actually so vibrant with life, it's actually really difficult to photograph. Because like the rainforest, there's a million things going on all the time. There's a gigantic swath of colors and shapes going on all the time. Most of the time when we see coral in images, we see coral forests of coral that's all one color because it's a single species or because it's all bleached and dead. In fact, coral is very vibrant here. And I will probably refer to my friend Shin, who is in the audience here, also because Shin was with me in Palau, and he was working with me, and the reason I'm talking to you today is because Shin kept me alive out there. So Palauans, big part of the reason that Palauans are able to make this gigantic marine protected area work is because of storytelling. You all are here because you're storytellers and you understand the importance of storytelling, but for Indigenous peoples, storytelling is in their blood. The Palauans actually have this form of stories called storyboards that are these hardwood carvings where they take their traditional stories and put them into the carvings. Like this manta ray, it contains this very important story called the story of the breadfruit tree. And the story of the breadfruit tree is a story that everybody knows. Every single Palauan knows this story. So it begins on the island of Niptal in Palau, where there is an elder woman. And this elder, she is hanging out, and she's in her village, and she's very sad because the villagers are basically starving her to death. She's a widow, and her son is away at war, and she has no way to provide protein for herself. All she has to eat is the breadfruit from the breadfruit tree in her yard. And so the villagers don't treat her very well. They don't help her. And one day, her son comes home from war, and it turns out that her son might be slightly more than natural, maybe supernatural. And her son goes to the breadfruit tree, sees the state that his mother is in, and says, "Mother, you will be hungry no longer." And he chops off a branch of the breadfruit tree, and out comes pouring the ocean, and with it all the fish. And all she has to do is hold her basket out, and then the fish fill into it. It's pretty nice. And so she gets all of that, and she's able to eat. And the villagers see this, and all the young men soon get really jealous because they think to themselves, oh my goodness, well, wouldn't it be great if we all could do that? Why do we have to work so hard to get our fish? And so they scheme, as young men do, and in the middle of the night, they sneak in and they chop the breadfruit tree off at the bottom. And sure enough, the sea pours out, but it never stops. And it keeps coming, and it keeps coming, and it keeps coming until there is no more high ground, and everybody in the village dies. I'm sorry, that's a very typical Indigenous story. It's a little darker than most. But every Palauan knows this story. And there's definitely a lot of lessons in this story, right? The first one of these stories is, don't be a greedy jerk. Don't be a greedy jerk. Don't take way more than you need. But the other more subtle part of this story that's embedded in this that the Palauans understand is it's actually not just a story about taking. It's not just a story about treating elders well. What it actually is a story about Palauan history. Palauans have lived on the islands forever. And if you overfish your reefs, you die. If you eat everything on the islands, you die. So they've learned over thousands of years that you can't do that. And one of the ways in which they remember this is by embedding it in these stories. And this story, what it really means is when the breadfruit is in season, you don't catch fish. You don't fish when there is breadfruit to eat. You eat breadfruit when the breadfruit is in season, giving the fish time to replenish, to recuperate. That is one of the central lessons and this is the kind of lesson that people from the outside never catch. They miss it because they don't understand the context of these stories. But this is how people pass that knowledge, that deep traditional knowledge from one generation to the next. And Palau is a really, really beautiful place. The resurgence of traditional culture in many Indigenous communities that has been colonized is happening everywhere in the world that I go to. I'm an example of that. I'm a person who builds kayaks, and I have for 20 years before I became a photographer. I still do. And likewise, I love boats. And because I love boats, it's also really cool to see that younger generations are really moving towards the traditions and practices that their older generations have forgotten or had beaten out of them, including the sailing of outrigger canoes in Palau. So the master navigator, Aquilino, there is the second generation of celestial wayfarers who is able to navigate by the stars and able to sail around the world by using just the stars at night. It's pretty remarkable. One of the coolest things that Aquilino does is he trains the young people in how to sail the outrigger canoes, and they pass on this knowledge. They're spinning these coconut fibers into rope for sailing, but it's an amazing thing. The teenagers actually will take the boats out and sail them. And Aquilino came up one day early in the morning, at 6 a.m. before dawn broke, and he found all the teenagers slumped on top of this outrigger canoe, sleeping in various positions because they've been out sailing all night. What teenagers do you know goes to do wholesome things like that? It's an amazing thing to see this kind of traditional culture really coming back in a huge way. We see this very much so in Palau. So this is a beautiful marine protected area. This is called the Rock Islands Preserve, and this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has some of the world's best diving. And Palau is very big in the regeneration department. So a lot has been destroyed in the past especially by international fishing and agreements with bigger nations that came in and basically took a lot out of the marine area. And so especially giant clams. And with giant clams, there is actually a giant clam factory. It's a giant clam nursery where giant clams are raised, and these beautiful clams here with their vibrant mantles, or lips, as it were, are then taken by any Palauan that wants to farm them and takes them and puts them on the reef. And of course, they will collect them for food or sell them to the aquarium trade, but many times when you plant a bunch of giant clams down there on the reef, you forget where some of them are, right? That's why we have oak trees, because squirrels forget where they put acorns. The fact that this picture doesn't have any reflections is thanks to my friend Shin. And, the wonderful thing about tourism, ecotourism also, is that sometimes I think it's a little bit easy to forget that places that are used extensively by human beings also can have extensive wildlife also. This grouper, who lives in the equivalent of a penthouse in New York, is in one of the world's top dive sites in the world, called the Blue Hole. He's just hanging out there, and obviously, I think that's Shin actually right there in that picture, and he's living pretty well in there, hanging out there at the Blue Hole. And of course, what can I say? This is just in a beautiful, beautiful marine environment with tons of sharks. Palau was the first nation to declare its waters a shark sanctuary. And the reason they did that is because the government commissioned a study about sharks, and they discovered that while a shark was worth $30,000 from the time that it was caught by a fisherman, sold, and then processed and sold to a bunch of other people, $30,000 is a lot of money. But it was when you took that same reef shark and you kept it alive for tourism, that reef shark was worth $1 million. That's a lot more. This is one of our buddies that we got to hang out with in Palau. The fact that these giant, slow-moving fish are still around at all, even though they make very easy targets for fishermen, is another testament to conservation. All of the dive guides really love these guys. Oh, by the way, that is that fish, the Napoleon wrasse, that is a 100-kilogram fish. And then we also get amazingly beautiful animals like this, which is the highly venomous sea crate, black-banded sea crate. And after spending about 40 minutes with this guy, it swam up towards the surface. I got a quick snap of this. So how does this marine protection happen? I mentioned this in the panel earlier, this idea that Palau is able to protect the marine sanctuary is created because of governance. Governance is the thing that's totally invisible, and most of us, we kind of hate talking about it, right? Talking about governance is so boring. This is the level of talking about taxes, right? But it's actually really important. Talking about governance means, how is it that humans organize themselves to actually listen to each other and actually get along and do stuff together? It's not that easy. Anytime you get more than two people together, actually, anytime you get more than one person together, it's not easy to get along. In Palau, you have this traditional chief system where there are 10 traditional chiefs for each state. And those chiefs, they determine what goes on in that specific community. Those communities are very small, but those communities really listen to their leaders. And so one day, for example, the way that a fishery is managed is that every fishery has 3 sections. There is a left, a right, and a middle, let's just say. Let's just call it that. It'll be easy. 3 sections. And so one day, someone says to the chief, hey, I don't see that many groupers over by this chunk of coral anymore. And so the chief goes out next time, a couple of weeks later, goes fishing and swims around and says, oh, you know what? There's not that many groupers here. Shut it down. And so he shuts down that section of the reef. But when that section is closed, the previous one that was closed reopens. So that there's never a loss of fishing area, but that also gives places a chance to rest and rotate. The other thing is that in Palau, certain reefs have a section that never opens. It's always closed, a kind of essential area where it's always closed. This is something that I think it's very easy for Westerners especially to understand, because it's a model of fishery conservation that we use also. But what's different about this is that because this is a traditional system that the people here love and respect, have been using for thousands of years, when it was scaled up to the national level, when it was no longer a single state at a time, but instead dozens of states, everyone agreed this is just like the bull, just like the traditional fishery system we have, so we'll do it. We'll do this national marine sanctuary because we believe in the bull. So how people have already the things that people already believe, the things that where people, you have to meet people where they're at. Sorry, my ears are flopping again. All right. And this is at the national level, so we see that there is a lot of support. Ooh, maybe I'll just be over here. Let me try this. Okay, all right. Yeah, so at the national level, there is a lot of support for this kind of thing. So we see national legislators in their democratic government mirroring the same kind of concerns that the local chiefs do. So Palau's story is actually two stories. I snuck in a second one for you because this is a really cool one, just to talk about indigenous values. So this portion of Palau is called Helen Reef, and this is one of the most beautiful coral reefs on Earth. This is the world's third largest coral atoll. It's quite remote, but it's also, because it's remote, this is the kind of spot where Chinese fishing vessels love to show up, right? Because nobody is watching what's going on in this very remote area. But this has some of the most pristine coral reefs on Earth that are extremely resistant to bleaching. And here, there are 4 rangers that are on station at any given time, right there on that tiny little sand spit of an island, which is the sole land here. This reef is the home reef for 2 neighboring islands, the 2 villages that use this reef to fish. And this is Ranger Brian Findley, who is a spearfisherman, as you can see, and he loves his reef, right? And so when in 2020, during the pandemic, a Chinese fishing vessel, 600 feet long, showed up at Helen Reef and drove out a bunch of vessels, and then the rangers saw them and came out to meet them. And essentially, it became very clear very quickly that this Chinese fishing vessel was trying to bribe the rangers to allow them to fish there. But the 600-foot industrial fishing vessel can destroy this reef in just a couple of days. It can just fish out everything in a couple of days. And it became very clear that as these Chinese people, that because they couldn't converse with the Palauans in the same language, they spoke the language of money and shoved $100 bills in front of these Palauans who don't make that much money. The Palauan rangers pulled out a video camera and said, all right, show us what you got. It turned out to be $100,000 worth of bribes. And they took the money, confiscated it, and then called for backup, and then stood off. This 16-foot dinghy stood off against a 600-foot Chinese vessel, armed for 36 hours while backup came. Palau then impounded the 600-foot Chinese fishing vessel, and it cost that company $3 million to get it back out. But you can imagine, that $100,000 was more than a year's salary for every single one of these rangers. They live in one of the most remote places on Earth, and they could have easily taken that bribe, but they didn't. And I asked them why, and one of them said, look at them. I mean, you want to mess with these guys? No. I mean, even their names alone will kind of tell you it's Petra, Tony, and Hercules. But one of them answered, no, we would never do that because this isn't our reef. This belongs to my sister's children. So just to show you how the sausage is made, as photographers, I know you guys love to see behind-the-scenes stuff. It's always just nice to see some footage of us working underwater. It's a really beautiful space, and of course, hanging out. There's nothing quite like hanging out with turtles in Palauan waters, which are so warm, it's basically like just hanging out in a bathtub. All right, so now I'm going to take you to another place, to northern Greenland. Northern Greenland is almost the opposite of Palau in so many ways. Culturally, this is a place that is extremely different. And this is a place that Westerners This is a place. This is a place that Westerners also don't understand how conservation works. But as you will see, it's the same idea, just slightly different. So the village, this is Xposure, which is the most northern community on Earth, a human community that is permanently settled on Earth. It's right next to the big city of Kanak, which is about 600 people. It's a really beautiful place. If you've been, it is an incredible location, but if you've ever been to Greenland, probably you've been to Ilulissat, which is where the famous ice fjord is. Kanak is 1,000 kilometers to the north, and that will be relevant later. This is also the place of the dog sled. So the wonderful thing about that I always talk about when we're talking about conservation in Greenland is that this is the story of the kayak and the dog sled. Also, that's how you say kayak. Kayak, not kayak. All right. I love being on the sea ice with the dogs. Nothing like the soft crunching of the snow and the smell of dog farts in the wind. One of the things I love about Inuit, which is the name of the culture here, the community here, Inuit have a real strong fashion sensibility. I mean, just think they love the colors of their land, and all their colors are these soft blues, whites, and off-whites, the yellows. One of the things you may notice is this kind of weird contraption around the rifle that is called a rifle blind or a kamutrak. And this rifle blind is used to hunt seals on the approach. Hunting a seal is very difficult. It is about 200 meters of slow walking, grunting, and 45 minutes later, you will arrive there after crawling there on your stomach. So it is not an easy thing to do. But the bounty of it equals food for humans and food for dogs. And this here is the quintessential pact that Inuit have with the seal. And this is one of the things that is extremely indigenous among hunting cultures, that it's very hard for Westerners to understand. But this is the pact. The seal is the prey, the thing that you catch. You're not catching it. You're not hunting it. It is giving itself to you. That is what hunters in places like this always say. And the pact, the invisible pact you always make when you receive that gift, is that in return for the gift of the seal's body, you have to ensure that there is a place for its grandchildren to exist, that its habitat is kept safe, that you keep its place safe and beautiful. One seal, I can tell you, will fuel people and a dog team for a round trip of 120 kilometers. It is a long distance, you can imagine. So there is no other fuel required, no other food required. That means everything you need comes from a single seal. This is basically the same way that polar bears operate. So one thing that has happened, though, is that there are a bunch of effects from colonial meddling. So what we see is that during the 1980s, activists in Canada decided to kill the seal hunt. And that inadvertently ended up affecting Indigenous peoples across Canada and Greenland and the entire world. And as a result, with the seal skin trade disappeared overnight, and hunters across, basically Inuit peoples across the world essentially went from having a living to no living at all. Ringed seals are one of the most plentiful resources in the Arctic. This is one of the things other than ice and snow that there is the most of. And what happened when this was created was that Inuits basically had to go overnight from hunting seals and selling their flesh to other Greenlanders, to getting to the point where they had to move to ice fishing for halibut. Now, that sounds great. People are like, oh yeah, fish. Fish don't have puppy dog eyes, so we don't mind if you kill them. But the problem is that 1 kilogram of fish is worth $1 US. So in order for you to haul the quantities of fish back that you would have to pay to actually make any money to make a living, you have to have a snow machine. You can't do it with a dog sled, really. So if you want to buy a snow machine, that's 20,000 kilograms of halibut that you have to catch. That's a devil's bargain. That's a bargain that none of these hunters wants, and they hate snow machines to begin with. They do not want them. They prefer dog sleds. So there are almost no snow machines in this community. There's 12 snow machines for a population of 800 people, which in the Arctic is extremely, extremely low. And this is what that ice fishing looks up close. It is really tough work. It's very easy to learn, but it's tough work and also requires a snow machine in order to haul everything. So I want to talk a little bit about the main point of this conservation was just talk about the narwhal hunt. So the narwhal hunt is really about the kayak. So conservation here of doing the hunting of these species is not that straightforward. For the longest time, people in Greenland had a conservation set of rules that they codified when the famous Danish explorer, famous Greenlandic explorer Knud Rasmussen codified a set of traditional rules around hunting called the Kiliii law. It's widely considered the earliest set of written conservation rules on Earth. And in it, there's a set of rules that are like, okay, when the sea ice is in here and not in here, then you can hunt seals in this area. When the narwhals are calving, you can hunt in this area but not this other area, etc. There's all these very specific rules, and you have to do it by kayak. You must use a harpoon. You can't use a rifle, etc. All of these different kinds of rules around the type of technology and what is in season and what is calving, etc. But then in the 1980s, Greenland started to train its administrators in Denmark. And from the south, suddenly, Qaanaaq lost its ability to manage its own wildlife, and its wildlife was suddenly managed by Ilulissat, 1,000 kilometers to the south. People in Ilulissat have no idea what it's like to live in Qaanaaq and what it means to hunt up here. And using the Western system, they decided, forget it, it's too complicated what you guys do. You're just going to have a quota. You can have this many narwhals, and that is it. And the people of Qaanaaq said, we don't like this, but we will follow your rules. But we also don't care. We're going to continue to follow our rules as well. So what that means is that for hunters, it's made life twice as hard. It is twice as difficult. They have to follow 2 sets of rules, meaning that they score less narwhals, and it's far more difficult for them to do so. Why would they do that? No one wants to make life easier, harder for themselves, right? Like people say this all the time. Humans will do what is the easiest path. That's not actually true. And so out here, hunting for narwhals is a really beautiful thing. People do it by kayak, and this is one of the keys to this system. Because hunting by kayak is quiet, it's targeted. When you throw a harpoon, you do not lose that narwhal. But if you shoot it with a rifle, there's a good chance it will sink and be lost. So hunting by kayak is difficult, it's dangerous, and it's slow. But this is the way that the community has decided as a group that they want to do it. And they continually have discussions about taking back the power, about finding a way to take their traditional rules and make them enforceable again, because they don't really like this quota system, but they want to actually just go full bore and make it legal to enforce on their young people as well and say, you guys have to follow these rules no matter what. And a big part of the reason is because, so here's the crux of this. Conservation for Inuit is not about saving narwhals. What it is about saving their culture. What they don't want to see gone is the kayak. They don't want to see gone the dog sled. They love those things. They believe that when you hunt by kayak, you get to share, and they don't want to lose their sharing culture. When somebody gets a narwhal on the ice edge, every hunter on that ice edge shares in this narwhal. When you get it by rifle or by motorboat, just that person who shoots it gets it. So they want to keep that sharing culture alive, and as a result, keeping to the traditions of their ancestors equals keeping the kayak, keeping the dog sled, and that means more narwhals. One of my friends, Sufus, said to me something really brilliant one time. I asked him about conservation, his thoughts about conservation. It's very hard to translate because they don't really have a concept like that. But he said, yes, we have a thing that's just like that, the way that you talk about conservation. And we tell this to our young people all the time. We call it namakatanyak. So namakatanyak means be patient, fool. And it's used for young people. You say it to young people who are impatient for the rules of nature, who are impatient for the ways of their ancestors. And what Sofus said to me essentially was, our community decides, we look around the world and we see that many things in the world many things in modern life promise to make our lives easier, but very few things, those things actually make our lives better. As a community, we will only accept the things that make our lives better. And that, I was struck by how wise and also how insightful that was. I think about that all the time, especially when I'm out on the sea ice among these hunters in this remarkable place, which has some of the world's healthiest population of marine mammals. And I know you all wanted to see some narwhals and their babies because they are beautiful creatures. Do you guys know where narwhals get their tusks from? They steal them from unicorns! Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to take you to Australia. This is in a portion of Australia that is Queensland, which is northeastern Australia. This is one of the oldest, this is the oldest rainforest on Earth. This is an incredible place where crazy things happen, like this strangler fig, which is becoming a tree by strangling a tree underneath it. Or cassowaries, these basically feathered velociraptors that run around in underneath the canopy. What's really cool about these animals is that everywhere you go in Australia, these are called keystone species, right? They're called keystone species because they eat the berries that rainforest trees drop, and then they go and poop them in other places. In fact, that service, eating and pooping, is so important to the rainforest that 150 different rainforest species require cassowaries in order for them to survive. Biologists believe that those species would go extinct without cassowaries. That's how important they are. As you can see, that little muppet of an animal there is eating one kwangdong seed as we speak. But here, this is a place where human beings have been managing the landscape for a very long time, probably as long as 65,000 years. We have archaeological evidence of this that goes back for many tens of thousands of years that is confirmed, but we don't know if it goes back as long as 65,000. But this is an amazing place where fire is used to maintain the rainforest. And as you can see, lots of species here have evolved around the presence of fire. Fire in a rainforest is kind of a wild thing when you think about it. How often does a fire naturally occur in a rainforest? It does happen, but not very often. However, species like these termites have evolved with fire-hardened shells, and that happens because there was frequent and regular occurrence of wildfires, which were made by human beings. So, why do people burn in these places? To encourage the growth of things that were useful to people, like the having more green ants around, which are a delicious snack and sting so badly. But I will say they're the most delicious species of ant that I've ever eaten. They're very good. And also these plums, these Davidson plums, which are also extremely delicious. And this is one of the bush foods that Elder Lizzie has shown me how to gather. And we also got these beautiful trees, like in the mangroves, there are these beautiful shield figs. And these kinds of trees were actually used for shields and for armor by the people. So maintaining mangroves was also an important function for the people here. And we get these crazy, amazing, unique endemic species like the Coranda tree frog, which is critically endangered with just 3,000 of them left. So what's wild about this animal is that the Daintree rainforest is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is one of the earliest UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's been protected for a very long time. Yet biodiversity in this forest goes down and down and down and down and down every year. Why is it going down? Scientists were stumped for the longest time about why this place, which is so well protected, basically has no human intervention at all. Why is the biodiversity continuing to decline year after year? Why are all the species dying out? It's because there is no fire. Because humans have been creating fire in this place for so long, and then were prohibited from creating fire for 200 years, that the biodiversity declined and dropped precipitously. And now that Aboriginal peoples are gaining this knowledge back and are starting to light fires again, and some of them are true masters like Dennis here, as they're lighting and learning how to do this again, the forest is coming back alive because these new ecotypes are being created. If you ever walk into deep, dense jungle, you will actually notice how quiet, especially the Queensland forest is. There's actually almost no sounds of insects or birds because none of the food is in the deep rainforest. The food is at the edges of the rainforest where it meets the woodlands, where it meets the ocean, where it meets the mangroves. And so it's really incredible to see this, their mastery of fire and how they're able to use it. But I don't want to get too much into it, but just to show you, Damien here is pointing at this. This tree is one that his great-grandfather bent. This tree marks the location, points the direction to a men's sacred site. And Damien has been passed down this knowledge for 3 generations, and he still knows what it means. This is masterful management of the land. And these are some of the rangers, including youth that have been trained and are learning all of these skills all over again, and all the way to master rangers who are very, very good and have really mastered the knowledge of fire, which takes a lot of training. And then it's incredible to see that these low-intensity burns, the flames never come up more than 1 meter high, and they go through a forest very quietly and very slowly, and are really called cool burns. They're very intentional. And like I spoke earlier about the ability for snakes to hunt, this was the carpet python that was hunting by the edge of this strip of fire, using the fire to hunt because it has evolved to learn that rodents run from the edge of the fire, and its best hunting strategy is to follow the line of the fire and find the rodents and chase them as they duck out of the fire line, which is incredible. Can you imagine? Only a specific type of fire works for this, right? If there are big flames, you have a roasted python. You don't have a good rodent snacks. And there they are. All right, so I'll take you to, I guess kind of to run through this a little bit quickly here. I want to talk a little bit of Mongolia because the Mongolians believe very strongly in the power of spirit and shamanism for the management of the land, and the nature of spirituality is extremely important. We are over here in the Altai mountain region, which actually 4 different nations border on in Central Asia. This is an incredible place, and this is a place where shamanism has boomed. So since the fall of communism in the 1990s, shamanism has risen again from less than 3% to double digits. Almost 20% of the populace is practicing shamanism. This shamanism is extremely important for the people of Mongolia as they embrace what was long their traditional spiritual practice. And it includes offerings to the snow leopard spirit. So we spent 2 days riding on horseback up to a hill, to a promontory, to offer the snow leopard spirit sheep, and to do a ceremony for the land and for the snow leopard spirit. This is an annual ceremony that happens. Then we also do, there is a lot of crossover, so Tibetan Buddhism has certainly influenced Mongolian shamanism. And what can I say? It's kind of incredible, isn't it? Some of the things that happen I'll show you the pictures of actual ceremony, but all of the bits surrounding on the outside edges of the ceremony are things that are something I can show you. You can see the connection in these ceremonies to the snow leopard. These people, under communism, these were people that actually used to hunt snow leopards, right? So they forgot their traditional way of life, and they were reintroduced to it because shamanism rose up again and taught the people that it was better to live together with the land. And you see this all the time now, where that intense connection to the spirits of the snow leopard are really powerful. That's a snow leopard cave that she's got her hand on, and she is feeling the power of it. And of course, a little snow leopard at the altar for the ceremony. And then I knew that photographing snow leopards themselves is best left to more capable people like, say, Sandesh or Charlie, but I found this cute little palace cat hanging out, pretending to be a piece of dung out on the Mongolian steppe, and I thought that was pretty nice. And it's remarkable to see things like this. I was really struck in Mongolia by how ancient the people, how long land stewardship has happened here. So Basar is a local leader of the herding group, and we walked up here, and everywhere in Mongolia there are petroglyphs. At the top of all of these mountains, every tiny little hill has petroglyphs on it, and they're astounding. These are 6,000 years old. And I was looking at them and photographing them when Basar walked up, and I saw that the patterns on his dill, his traditional dill, or actually mirrored the shapes on the petroglyphs, and I was like, oh my God. But then what hit me even more so was that Basar is looking out over a landscape that his ancestors looked out over and is almost the same. It is almost exactly the same as it was 6,000 years ago. Who else can say that about their place? Sorry, I'll skip you that TikTok because you're running out of time. But it is an incredible place, as you can see, these ibex running up here in this gorgeous canyon. And the herding, there are pastoral people herding yaks as well as sheep. The economic pressure from the sale of cashmere has meant that Mongolians have started to herd way more goats and sheep than is really good for the land, and the Mongolians recognize this and are trying their absolute best to bring back the species like camels and other things and replace the number of cashmere goats on the land. And so they're trying to do things like take back their traditional breeds and use less of their ancient breed, less of the cashmere goats and go to more of the traditional breeds, which produce more but take more time, because they really care that the land itself is not damaged. They see through multiple generations that that is not good for the land and for their own livestock in the long run. And ceremony is everywhere. The spirituality is everywhere. It's so beautiful to see this, that all of this, that every tiny little hill, the mouth of every spring has a shrine on it, in that there are protector spirits that are used. Like this horse is being endowed as a protector for this herd, and it will be released so that it never has to work a day in its life again, and will be protected by all the herders in the area who recognize its special status as a protected horse, as a protector of that land and that place. And I also just want to say also how wonderful it is for the way that Mongolians live in terms of the sheer joy of life. This is a kid's 4-year-old birthday party. And again, there's shrines everywhere. It's a very lovely place. So finally, I want to end on the note of Ecuador in the Ecuadorian Amazon among the Kofan people. So the Kofan are amazing, amazing people. They are the OGs. They have been fighting big oil in the Amazon for the longest time, 70 years. This is where they are. I spoke about it earlier, but the Kofan have a land that is bigger than Yellowstone, bigger than Yosemite National Park, yet they maintain their land for less than $30,000 a year. This was Hugo Lusitante, one of the leaders of the Kofan, and his story the role that he occupies is extremely important because this is an adaptation to the modern world. Indigenous peoples increasingly have to deal with these obstacles that the outside world imposes on them that are really serious and very difficult. Ugo, when he was 10 years old, was taken aside by his elders and told this, Ugo, we love you. You are the least selfish of the children. We've been watching you your whole life. So I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but you have to go live in the big city of Quito and learn Spanish. And then you have to go to America and learn English and get a degree in environmental science so that you can fight for our people. And Ugo said, what are you talking about? All I know how to do is hunt and fish. But his parents agreed, and they sent him off to Quito. And by the time he got to Brown University and was working on his PhD, everyone around him said, Ugo, this all sounds great and stuff, but you're never actually returning to your home village, right? Now you've seen the wonders of America, and you have running water and a refrigerator. Why would you ever go back to the Amazon? And Ugo actually cut his PhD short because he thought that it was a waste of time because his people needed him every minute, and he couldn't stay a second longer. So this is an incredible place, right? The Kofan live on the lands that by the Chicago Field Museum are designated the highest biodiversity in the entire world because of the sheer variety of ecosystems that there are, from wetlands to rainforest. But right outside of Kofan lands, this is what it looks like. I will tell you, that all used to be rainforest. That is all now palm oil. As far as the eye can see, 30 kilometers of palm oil. I was absolutely stunned by this, but when you look on satellite maps of the Amazon, from Ecuador to Brazil, you will see that the borders of indigenous land are forested, and right outside the borders of indigenous land, it's deforested. It's amazing when you look at it on the map. I wish that I had put that into this presentation, actually, but I would be glad to show it to you if you want to see it later. And the other thing that we see is also illegal gold mining. There's been a lot of talk about gold mines. This gold mine, as it turns out, was active. And the Kofan told me, you better fly, make sure. They thought this was a defunct gold mine, but we flew the drone from the other side, from half a kilometer in the other direction, to make sure that if anyone was there and they spotted us, that we could run away. And sure enough, that excavator was there, and they were still mining away. There was still cyanide going into that river and mercury going into that river. So we pulled the drone out, and the guys were so nervous, we got into the water and paddled the canoe down and got away from there. While the drone was in the air, we flew it and landed in the canoe just to get out of there because they knew that they were coming for us to kill us. That's a big deal. So out here, this is a beautiful, beautiful place, and the fishing is good. And the Guardians here are really amazing people. They volunteer to cut a swath around this gigantic border that they have every year. And the 30 volunteers that they have, they go and they cut a stage-wide border around their entire lands using machetes and boots. They have to pay for their own boots and machetes to do this work, which they volunteer for. It was incredibly hard work. And they do it. But this is what they're fighting against. Oil. And this is oil from 70 years ago that's still on their land. Ugo took me to see it, and he said, don't step anywhere I don't step. And then he picked up just grass off the ground. And then we looked at the stream, and that's what that stream looked like. The oil is still there. So the Kofan leaders have told me things are more dire than they've ever been. That even though we see that what they've done is really remarkable, and we think of it as one of the great success stories of conservation of all time, that actually, in fact, what they've done is they think of it as they're losing more and more every single day. But I have hope. I have a lot of hope, because look at these guys. How can you not have hope looking at the faces of these guardias, this group of people who is all volunteer, who's dedicated to protecting their lands? And the reason is, although Indigenous value the land more than anything else, at the end of the day, I have faith in Indigenous peoples protecting the lands because it's their home. It's where their food comes from, and they will always protect their home. And that is where my hope lives. Thank you. Oh, wait. I guess I have to take questions, right? Do I have time for questions? Okay. Yeah, anybody?
So, in these cultures that you were working with in Mongolia, do they have any stories about the Pallas's cat?
Oh, palace cat stories. That's great. You know, I don't know. I wasn't able to ask. They were in Mongolia because I didn't speak the language, even though it's funny because we're pretty closely related. But I didn't get any stories about palace cats that are like cultural stories. But they did tell me some interesting things. One of the things that they said was that palace cats are the way they are because they camouflage themselves to look like dung on the steppe. And if you see them, you'll see that they are kind of fat and pancake-like, and then they squat down on the land, and they just look like a piece of cow dung, which is really funny. Anybody else?
Oil guardians?
OG? Oh, sorry. That would be original gangster. Sorry, yes. The original Guardians. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Well, now's my song and dance number. No, just kidding. All right, cool. I'm out. Thank you, guys.